The president is set to deliver his State of the Union address tonight in the same House chamber where he was impeached less than 2 months ago. Yesterday, House managers and the president's legal team gave closing remarks ahead of tomorrow's vote on removal and conviction. Senators are expected to acquit President Trump on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Nancy Cordes has the latest from Capitol Hill.
The president's behavior was shameful and wrong.
Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski is the latest Republican to condemn President Trump, though she said she would not vote to remove him.
I cannot vote to convict. The Constitution provides for impeachment, but does not demand it in all instances.
She joins a series of Republicans who say they will vote to acquit.
The House didn't prove Trump committed a crime.
House impeachment managers and the president's legal team made their final pleas yesterday, ahead of Wednesday's vote.
You can't trust this president to do the right thing, not for 1 minute, not for one election, not for the sake of our country. You just can't.
The defense insisted the Democrats' case does not meet the high bar for impeachment.
The only appropriate result here is to acquit the president and to leave it to the voters to choose their president.
Mr. Cotton, no. Mr.
Senate
Kramer.
Democrats are still angry about Friday's close vote against new witnesses.
We must call this what it was. It's a cover-up.
But your fear of this bully cannot outweigh your duty to the American people.
One Democrat who is on the fence, West Virginia's Joe Manchin.
I remain undecided on how I will vote.
His state went for President Trump by 42 points in 2016. Yesterday, he proposed a middle ground.
His behavior cannot go unchecked by the Senate, and censure would allow a bipartisan statement condemning his unacceptable behavior in the strongest terms.
His proposal has not gained much traction yet. The president continued to attack the process from the sidelines Monday. Republicans are urging him not to dwell on impeachment when he addresses Congress and the nation tonight.
There's a lot of other things that he needs to talk about. We've got the hottest economy we've ever had. I would stick on that.
All right, Nancy Cordes is joining us from the Hill. Nancy, you mentioned Republicans are hoping the president stays away from the topic of impeachment tonight. Well, why is that, and what can we expect them to talk about instead?
Well, there are a few reasons why they'd like him to avoid it. First of all, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Yes, they anticipate that he will be acquitted. The two-thirds majority needed to remove him from office simply isn't there, but still they think it would be unseemly for him to talk about beating the rap before it has actually happened. It could, for example, sour the few Democrats who are considering voting to acquit him. And so they'd like him to stay mum on the topic. They don't think that it particularly helps him, especially because you've got a number of Senate Republicans who now say that they think what he did was wrong. And they don't think that it's anything to crow about that he is staying in office. They want him to take a lesson from this, that he shouldn't try to pressure foreign governments again. Beyond that, they think that there are a lot of great things that he could be talking about, the economy, what he's got planned for the upcoming year, and they simply don't see a lot of benefit from him, dredging up something that they think has been one of the low points of his presidency.
So during closing arguments, House impeachment manager Adam Schiff asked the Republicans who have acknowledged the president's wrongdoing to prevent a, quote, runaway presidency. We know Democrats likely do not have the votes to remove and convict the president. So how are Democrats hoping to frame this conversation after the president's expected acquittal?
Well, first of all, they sure would like at least one Senate Republican to vote to remove him from office. They'd be able to claim that this was a bipartisan move. Republicans, of course, hoping the same thing in the other direction, that at least one Democrat will vote to acquit him. So their argument, Adam Schiff and the rest of the House managers, their argument was really aimed at those really one or two Senate Republicans, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, who they think possibly might be willing to stand up to this president and vote to remove him from office. And beyond that, they made the case, Vlad, that far from being cowed by this whole experience, or having learned a lesson that, first of all, the president has been unrepentant. He hasn't apologized for anything. That kind of sets him apart from, let's say, Bill Clinton or Richard Nixon, who were caught doing things that were viewed as inappropriate in the past, even impeachable. They apologized. They say this president hasn't. And beyond that, they argue he is continuing to do the things that he was impeached for. He's continuing to stonewall Congress. He is continuing to pressure Ukraine, they say, by sending his private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to Ukraine again and again to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. So the warning that came from Adam Schiff in very stark terms yesterday was, if you think that this president is going to do this again, well, I can tell you there's a 100% chance he will do it again. Not sure that Senate Republicans would necessarily agree with that, but that's the case that the Democrats were making.
And as you know, Nancy pointed out, Senator Lisa Murkowski is the latest Republican to criticize the president for wrongdoing. She went further than a lot others have, but she's also saying she will acquit him.
Right.
So what are you hearing as to why more and more Republicans are publicly taking this stance? And could it mean that Senator Joe Manchin's proposal to censure the president could get some traction from Republicans if Mitch McConnell gives it the green light, I guess?
There are a couple of reasons why some Senate Republicans, certainly nowhere near all, are going there. Number one, they want to discourage the president from doing this again. They want him to know that they think it was wrong. Second of all, it's difficult for them to ignore the evidence that he did do something wrong. They have conceded that the House impeachment managers did their job in one regard. They laid out facts that are fairly incontrovertible, that president and people around him tried to pressure the Ukrainians using U.S. military aid. And so I think some Senate Republicans were wary of following in the footsteps of House Republicans and simply turning a blind eye to all of that. They said, yes, the evidence is there. We can't ignore it. We can't deny it. And we hope he won't do something like this again. As to whether the Manchin censure proposal will pick up any traction with Republicans, I'm not sure about that. That would require Leader McConnell to basically come down hard on the president from his own party. Yes, a censure doesn't have a lot of teeth, but I still don't know that McConnell would want to go there, especially after the Senate has been completely tied up by all of these stories about the president's behavior for the past 2 weeks. I think McConnell is pretty interested in moving on, but he's going to talk more about this today, so we could get some insight into his thinking.
All right, we'll be looking forward to that. Nancy Cordes for us on the Hill. Nancy, as always, we thank you.
You're welcome.
For more, let's bring in Ilya Shapiro. He's the director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. So, Ilya, good to see you. Walk us through what tomorrow's voting proceedings in the Senate trial will look like.
Well, Chief Justice Roberts will call the Senate to order, and they will do a roll call vote, as they've done on these various motions regarding witnesses and evidence and everything else. It's a bit anticlimactic. We'll see if there's anything in the State of the Union about it tonight, but that's just it. There'll be one by one. They'll be called, and orally will say how they want to vote.
So what kind of constitutional implication, if any, could a vote to acquit the president have? I'm just thinking in the future.
None. I mean, it's as if nothing happened as far as the Constitution is concerned. There's no, he'll be one of those presidents like Clinton who's impeached but not removed.
And some Senate Democrats are floating the idea of censuring the president, even if he's acquitted in this trial. You heard Nancy say essentially it comes down to Mitch McConnell. But if for some reason he were to allow it, what would that look like?
Well, it's your guess is as good as mine how many Republicans would sign on to that. It would be a resolution like any other resolution, like when they name a post office or declare it to be Black History Month or anything like this. The Senate would vote. There's been only one time in our history where the Senate has passed a resolution of censure. That was against Andrew Jackson. The House has done one as well against James Buchanan. So it doesn't happen that often. Of course, it happened in the West Wing for fans of that show. But
I remember that. Yeah.
That's all it is. It would be, and again, it would come down to Mitch McConnell, some sort of leadership agreement to hold a vote. Joe Manchin, I'm sure, and a lot of the moderates would like to have that kind of out. But at this point, I doubt that Mitch McConnell would allow it to happen.
So, Ilya, when all is said and done, again, I'm just fascinated by this sort of whether or not what's happened over the course of the last 2 weeks is precedent setting. And do you foresee what we witnessed over the last couple of weeks being chewed over in law school classes, being debated by other lawyers or by judges, but perhaps not as a matter of law, but perhaps as an exercise? I mean, is this something that we'll look back on and find inconsistencies or things? Will there be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking in the future, I guess, is what I'm asking.
That's a lot of questions, but what it boils down to is I don't think this will be discussed in law schools. I think it'll be discussed in political science graduate seminars and things of that ilk, because as we've been discussing, I've been on several times the last few weeks. Not much of this has legal rules or constitutional salience. It's largely a political exercise, and John Roberts presides much more than acts as a judge it would in a court of a criminal law or what have you. And so I think the consequences are, well, if a future president does something that people don't like, is this worse than what President Trump did and was acquitted for? Is this worse than what President Clinton did and was acquitted for? So those are the kinds of precedents that it's going to be talked about. But I remind you that so not everything that is a criminal offense is impeachable, and something does not have to violate an actual statute to be an impeachable offense.
Good reminder. Ilya Shapiro, as always, we thank you, my friend.
My pleasure.